When Nancy came to meet me for the first time in my office, I was expecting a talk about membership, church, the typical things that somebody comes to talk to a pastor about for the first time. And she looked me straight in the eye and she asked me her first question. And it wasn't about faith or Christ or God or the denomination. She wanted to know about my belief. She wanted to know about what I believed about the death penalty. So I told her that, yes, Nancy, I believe there is a time and a place for the death penalty. And I went into a bit of a dissertation probably about why I thought that. And I watched this tear well up in her eye and trickle down her face. And I watched a human being break. And I stopped and I asked her what was wrong. And she said, how can you believe that? How can you claim to be a Christian and a minister and believe that killing my son is okay? Her child is on death row. Her only son is due to be executed. She says, you're not supposed to believe it's okay to kill someone. The Bible says it's not okay to kill someone. And I didn't have an answer for that. It does say that. So, thou shalt not kill. And it's really easy to come up with all kinds of justifications. We come up with justifications for police officers and soldiers and in defense of those we love. I asked her to tell me about her son, about Adam. And through the tears, she told me about her baby boy who had struggled, who had some issues with some mental issues, with emotions. He's bipolar. She told me about struggles in school with learning to read, but she also told me about him going fishing and about laughter and times of joy. And all of a sudden, this person who, I'm sorry, the people on death row are supposed to be monsters. They're supposed to be Timothy McVeigh's and Jeffrey Dahmer's and Ted Bundy's, people who do heinous, terrible things. They're not supposed to be somebody's little boy. They're not supposed to be human. But she painted such a picture of Adam. And she told me what had happened. And there was no doubt Adam had killed someone. He had taken a life. I hugged her, and she walked away. And I didn't think I would ever see her again, because why would you come back to the person who had just been that final straw of pain? I really thought I had failed that day as a minister. She's came back. Somehow she has graced me with her compassion and her forgiveness and her faith. And she's asked me to walk beside her as she walks towards saying goodbye to her child. We are supposed to be able to offer comfort to the ones we love when they're afraid. And she hasn't been allowed to do that. For almost 10 years now, every visit she has had with her child has been through glass. No contact allowed. Every visit he's had with a spiritual advisor has been through glass. No contact allowed. And every visit he will have until death will be through glass. No contact allowed. Next time Nancy touches her son, will be about an hour after he's dead, and she'll have 15 minutes with him. And it's not right. It was about a year ago that Nancy first came, and I asked her several times if I could share this story with the church. I had this image of her elders reaching out to her and people coming to hug, and she was so afraid. She was so afraid of being judged and found lacking that the answer I kept getting was no. And I honored that, of course. So it's only been in the last few months that she gave me okay to share it with the church. And it was scary to be able to tell a room full of people something so hard. And I think we tend to shy away from talking about what's really hard from the pulpit. I used the story of Jesus's mother. And so I talked with them about wondering what it had been like for Mary. What it had been like for Mary as her son was condemned to death. What had it been like in the weeks leading up to his death? I asked him questions like, had she been able to touch her son? Had she been able to hug him one last time? I asked them if Mary's friends had stood by her, or had maybe all of Mary's friends gone away. I asked about Joseph. Did they think that Joseph would have been there and stood with her and allowed her to rant and rave and cry and scream? Or would he have been so wrapped up in his own pain? I talked to him about that trip where Jesus is carrying his cross. And I sort of visualized Mary trying to break through the crowds to bear the brunt of that lash if she could, because that's what a mother does. We try and take the pain for our children. I wondered if, as that nail went into his hand, if she flinched, feeling the pain as if it was her own, or did she stand stoic and trying to be as strong as she could? And then she waited for her baby boy to die. And then I asked my church, would they have stood for Mary? Would they have stood with her? Would they have done all the things we do when somebody's child is dying? Would my church, would anybody have stood with Mary? Then I took a deep breath and I told them about when she had came in that day. And I watched the faces sort of change just a little, wondering what it had meant. And then I told them they knew this woman. And some of them leaned forward, waiting to hear. And some of them leaned back, and you could tell there was I'm afraid, I'm scared now. This is all of a sudden getting a little too close and too real. And I gave a name, and I told them about Nancy and her son. And I asked them to stand with her. Over and over again, I asked them to stand with a mother whose child was being killed, to stand with a mother who had not been allowed to touch, to stand with a woman and a friend who needed them. And I asked them to be the church, to be Christ's church, and to do what we are called to do. And there were tears, and there was shaking of heads. I heard one voice said, "I will." And they stood. In the days following that service, Nancy got cards and letters and emails, and she now has people who she's in constant contact with. She no longer fears the judgment from here. This is now someplace she knows is a safe place. I was worried. I'll admit that. I was worried that this was something that was too hard and too close and too painful. That old judgments and old beliefs, just like the ones I had, would get in the way. But they stood. And they will continue to stand. On that day, on Tuesday, when Adam is being executed, I have so many things I'm afraid of on that day. I'm afraid of the sheer pain that I'm going to be surrounded by. Nancy and her husband and people, when we walk through the protesters and the victims' families right there, that pain and anger. Walking into that room, I'm afraid of the smells and the sounds. I'm afraid of Adam coming and fighting out of fear. I'm afraid that the people in charge of strapping him to that gurney are not going to be kind and gentle. I'm afraid that drugs won't work or not work right. I'm afraid I won't be able to comfort the other people that will be in there as witnesses for him. And I'm afraid I feel it's my duty to do so. I'm afraid of not being able to be the church for them at that moment. I'm afraid that I won't ever not see this again. I'm afraid that every time I close my eyes, I will see this young man being executed over and over again. I'm afraid of having to go back through the line of protesters, some of whom will be cheering and celebrating. And I'm afraid of going back in and seeing his mama break again. And I'm afraid that somewhere something has changed in me with this. And it won't ever unchange, because now I have to question. I have to question all of my beliefs, why I believe what I do. I have to look at things differently than I ever have before. And I can't ever do that again without being honest with myself and my God. And it is going to change everything. And it should. This isn't something that I should remain unchanged from. But change is scary. Growth is scary. For my part, I hope I'm strong. I hope I am able to be a source of comfort and strength for Nancy and her family. I hope that when I spend my final 15 minutes with Adam on that day, that I am able to say something that brings him peace and lets him go quietly. I hope that the people who are in charge of the execution do it with compassion, with care for his dignity, and believe that this is their calling to do it as humanely as possible. I hope that if the victim's family is meant to find closure through this, that they do so. And then I hope that when I walk into that room and I go and I hug Nancy, that I'm able to stay strong. I can fall apart when I get home and I'm surrounded by my family, but I don't want to fall apart then. And I hope that something changes about this. I hope that through what I learn and how I grow in this, that I can be a force for change somehow. If I can open up a heart, open a mind, and affect some sort of change, somehow, then all the rest of it becomes a little more worth it. And I hope that in the days, weeks, and months ahead, that my heart heals. When we got to where we were going, when we got to Hospitality House, I went looking for a place where I could take a deep breath and be calm and feel all those wonderful feelings that I know I've felt before when I found God and God's been there and said, it's okay. And I went into this garden and it's full of flowers and there's butterflies around. It's almost picture perfect. And I couldn't pray and I couldn't find words. I couldn't find God and I didn't find peace. And I tried. I cried, but even that didn't feel cleansing. It didn't feel healing. It didn't feel strengthening. It just felt weak and helpless. And I went in and I went into the chapel, and it's got beautiful stained glass, and it's got a Bible, and it's got all the things that are supposed to be in a chapel, in a place of prayer. And I sat on the glider and I waited for this feeling that never came. And instead, all I felt was the anger building back up and the hopelessness and the helplessness and the feeling like I was really out of my depth and the big fear that I was going to make it worse. Before we went to bed that night, Nancy came and she grabbed my arms and she said, God's going to fix this, right? God is going to make this okay. It's not going to happen, is it? And I looked into those eyes, and the hardest thing I've had to say to date is, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen on the morning. Her room was right next to mine, and I heard her crying throughout the night. And I heard her husband crying. And I hope to God they didn't hear my crying. Because every tear that fell at that point in time felt like a sign of weakness. It felt like I was doubting too much to be strong. And I needed to be strong. And I prayed that night. For the first time in a long time, got down on my knees on the side of the bed, and I hadn't done that since I was a child. And I think pretty much the only thing I could get out was please, 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 please. I I don't remember if I could articulate, please what? And all I could get out was please, 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 because I still hadn't found that comfort and that strength. And I was terrified of what the morning was going to bring. I was afraid because what I wanted to do was to pack up and drive away. Everything in me said, go. You don't want to do this. You don't want to experience this. You're not trained for this. You are not equipped for this. And apparently God's not here giving you the strength to face this. So leave. Just check out. And I waited for this monster to come out to talk to me. And I expected and I hoped for tattoos and piercings, and I hoped for foul language. And I wanted to see something in him that fit all those images I had had in my head of what somebody on death row, someone who is deserving of death, that monster looked like. I wanted to come face to face with that person who would willingly rip heads off of babies and shove old people out of their wheelchairs and laugh at their pain. And what I got was an articulate, clean-cut, funny, highly intelligent, caring young man who worried about his mom and his dad, and who missed his dogs and worried about whether they'd be okay, and who talked about being in 4-H and a Boy Scout and the mistakes he had made. Who I met and who I spent an hour and a half with, and who I did not want to leave, was someone who very easily could have been my son, who could have been any of the wonderful young men I know, who had wanted to do something with their life and instead knew he was about to face death. When I said goodbye to him, it was with the knowledge that the next time I saw him would be in the execution chamber. His last words to me were, "Take care of my mom." They talked about what would be going on with Adam in the hours to come, about how he would be in a room, that there would always be a chaplain with him. And I asked if he was being given rights. Was someone going to be able to bestow a blessing on him? And they said, yes, as long as there's no touch. I said, so no laying on of hands, no touching a shoulder, no holding a hand, no anointing with oil, any of the things that I might do for someone else who was passing away. No touch. They wanted us to know that he would never be alone. And I talked to the chaplain a little. I said, please explain to me why touch is not allowed. Why in these final days, when there's absolutely nothing to lose but possibility of gaining comfort and peace for a parent, a child, a sibling, and the person facing death, touch is not allowed. And the answer was security. They said, surely you understand that. Surely you understand that we can't risk security just to give somebody comfort. And everything inside of me rebelled at that, because If we can't offer comfort at the moment of death, how in the world are we any different than the people we've found unredeemable enough to put to death? At 6:17, we were walked into the chamber. We're taken into a small room. It's maybe 6 feet across and 8 feet long, if that. It's probably narrower than that. And there's a plexiglass shield. And Adam's already in the execution chamber. He had draped in white. And his hands are secured out like this. And they're bound. And all I could think of when I saw him was that he was on a cross. That image being that it was Holy Week, being that I was there in the position I was, all I could see was a young man, 33 years old, stretched out on a cross, and his hands are bound there, and he doesn't have the ability to move. And I think that's probably when my first tear started. And I know my knees got weak. And Adam looked at us, and he made eye contact with each and every one of us. And he smiled, and it was the most gentle smile. And I watched. I looked to see if he was breathing fast or if he showed any signs of fear. And what I got instead was a young man so full of peace and so calm and in such acceptance that moment I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt God was in that room. He was holding Adam on that gurney. He was covering Adam with that drape. He was everywhere in there. Adam took a deep breath and he made his final statement. And instead of the rantings of an angry young man that I had been afraid to hear, what I heard instead was a young man who thanked all the people who had been fighting for him, who had supported him. A young man who said how much he loved his mom and his dad, and that he prayed they would find acceptance. A young man who asked forgiveness for the people he had hurt with his crime, and then who in turn gave forgiveness for the people who were about to put him to death. And it resonated so strongly. And all I heard in the back of my head was, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. He was calm and he was peaceful. And his mom and dad would have been so proud of him in that moment. I was proud of him in that moment. I wanted to shout out how beautifully he had done that. I wanted to share with everybody the grace that was being so evident there. And Adam said, I'm done. He had to give notice that he was finished, saying he was done. So he took a deep breath and he said, I'm done. And then a second later, he said, I feel it. And he took a deep breath and he let go. Adam Ward was declared dead at 6:34 p.m. One of the things I hadn't known was that nobody would have told the parents. I guess in my head, I thought that chaplains there would get hold of the chaplains with the family and say, yes, this has happened. Their son was declared dead at this time. Or there's been a stay. But they didn't do that. So the person who very unexpectedly was left to tell her was me. And she came out of that house with this wild hope in her eyes. She grabbed my arms. And I told her how proud she would have been of her son. And I told her that he died with dignity and with grace, with forgiveness, that he was calm and at peace. And that was how she found out that, yes, her child was dead. About 15 minutes after we got out to the hospitality house, the chaplain said it was time to go and view the body. The body is taken to a local Baptist church. And this would be the first time that a piece of glass has not separated mother and child. Adam was up at the front, but the sound that came out of that mother when she saw her child laying there, there's no other sound like that. It is a sound of such raw pain. And it is so mixed in with rage and so covered in despair. Nothing else on earth sounds like that. And she started to fall, both literally and figuratively. Her knees buckled. And it was almost as if you could see her faith leaving her in that moment, because God hasn't answered her prayers. God hasn't stopped this from happening. Her child is dead. So everything about her is falling. And I had been walking with her physically this time, trying to hold her up. And I didn't feel I was strong enough to carry her. I knew I wasn't going to be strong enough to get her to that gurney. And I didn't think I was strong enough to carry the weight of her faith or her loss or her despair. But I did. I could feel it in me. I could feel the strength that I had been praying for all those days was there in that miserably dark, sad room. She got to the gurney, and she kept asking him to get up. She wanted her baby boy to come and be alive. And I wondered how many other mothers had held their child and tried to give them their strength to come back. When I had told my church about what was happening, I had used the example of Jesus' mother and wondered if she was there while her son was beaten. And I wondered if she was there when he was nailed to that cross and when he was brought down and she knew he was dead. If she had begged for him to come back just for one more time. And I kept thinking about that as I'm with this mother and her son, and he's dead, and she's begging him, begging God to bring her child back. This is the longest and hardest 20 minutes I've ever faced. And that's all it was, because that's all that's allowed. There's a time limit put on grief there. When we left the church, when we left the body, there was so much grief in that car. What surprised me was that it wasn't just theirs. I had expected Mom and Dad's grief and pain. I wasn't prepared for mine. I wasn't prepared to have the doubts about where the hell God was in all this. I wasn't prepared to have this anger at God for letting this happen. I wasn't prepared for my doubts in all of this. But they were there. And in the midst of all that is this worry about how, if I'm angry at God and if I'm doubting God and I'm wanting to know why God isn't there, how can I take care of these other people that are hurting? And I went into my room because I just needed a minute. I needed a minute away from the people who were looking at me to see if I was okay, and I needed a minute away from the people who were looking for me for answers I didn't have, and I needed a minute away from all that grief. And I went and I got down on my knees again. And I couldn't even get please out of my mouth this time. All I could do was cry. And God was there. And while I won't say that I was washed in peace and comfort, because I'd be lying, I was given strength. And I knew it was okay to be angry at God. And I knew it was okay to yell and rant and rave. And I knew it was okay to doubt. I went into the prayer room we have, where a retired minister was offering communion. And as he handed me the elements of bread and cup, God filled that space. And I knew it was okay that I had doubted, that I continued to have anger. And I'm so glad I went for those elements, because I don't think I would have got through that day without them. I don't think if I hadn't consciously gone to Christ and asked to be filled, if I hadn't taken those steps, I'm not sure I would have recognized God's presence in the rest of it. But I think one of the things that I needed to do was decide what was going to happen with this, because the temptation is there, like it is with anything hard that we deal with, to crumble it up and throw it into the dark corner, to hide it, to ignore it, to wall it up because it's painful. But I also know that if I did that, then the part of me that Adam trusted would die. The part of this journey that I had been trusted with and gifted with would fade away. There's times when, as a minister, the burdens placed on our shoulders are so heavy. Times when the education and the learning, the help from other peers and stuff doesn't feel like it's enough. And you doubt, and you get angry. And it's okay, because in those moments, no matter how hard the journey is, you don't walk it alone. God walks with you and carries you when you can't do it alone. Hello, I'm Reverend Deanna Golsan. I'm the senior pastor at Disciples Christian Church in Plano, Texas. And I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. I know it wasn't easy, and it shouldn't be. It is my hope and my prayer that regardless of how you felt going into the video, that your heart and your mind have opened and you are ready to be a force for change. It's been 4.5 years since Nancy first came into my office. Since that time, I have learned and changed, and my heart and my mind will be forever different. Adam Kelly Ward was convicted of capital murder for the shooting death of a code enforcement officer in the city of Commerce, Texas. He had no previous jail time, no previous arrest record, no criminal offenses of any kind. What he did have was a long history of mental illness. He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, childhood PTSD, and had a dissociative disorder that caused his reality in times of great stress to skew. He was a Boy Scout. He was a son. He loved his dogs. He was as normal as any of us. When I met Adam, I didn't find the monster that I needed to see. I found what could be you. I found somebody who laughed and loved, and who had lived the last 10.5 years of his life in a 5x8 cell without touch. You see, the state of Texas does not allow contact visitation. It does not allow someone to have the full tenets of their faith if that involves touch. That means a Catholic cannot be anointed with oil, even for the death ritual and the rites. It means that someone cannot have a laying on of hands as they ask for absolution and forgiveness. It means that even the chaplains who go and see them cannot put a hand on their shoulder and offer comfort. Now, if you are a murderer and a rapist, or a robber, or a drug lord, and you're in general population, all of those things are available to you, regardless of how many people you have hurt. You are allowed corporate worship and the energy that comes from worshiping with others. You are allowed to sit with friends as you dine. You're allowed to go to the library with other people and to work out with others. But most of all, you are allowed to hug, to hold a hand with your mother, your father, your sister, brother, your wife, or your child. None of that is available to those on death row. What we do with people on death row is inhumane. For the month prior to Adam's death, he knew, and his parents knew, the time he would die and the date. We are not meant to know when death will come. That is cruel and unusual punishment. You see, and it wasn't just Adam that was punished. It was his family, his friends, those who loved him. By not being allowed to touch, even on the day of his death, we forced something hard and terrible. We told them that they were criminals too. And they were innocent. It is my hope and my prayer that you choose to do something. Find the writings of your denomination and how do they feel about the death penalty? Do they support it? And if so, can you change that? Are they opposed to it? And are they active in that opposition? Talk to your minister. And if you are a minister, preach about it from the pulpit. We tend not to do that. It's hard. Bring in people like me and others who have had experience with the death penalty. There are many out there. There are victims who do not want this added violence in their life, as they don't believe in it, but yet many of them are forced to accept that. There are exonerees who have spent decades on death row to be found innocent, sometimes just days prior to their execution. And unfortunately, there are the parents, the loved ones of those who, after execution, have been found innocent. Texas is better than this. Texas is better than the Wild West mentality that the death row shows other states we have. Texas can do better. The United States of America can do better. And the other 28 states who believe in the death penalty can do better too. There are options to the death. There is life without possibility of parole. Other places do it, and it is fine. This death penalty does not serve as a deterrent. It is not cheaper than keeping someone alive. All of those are myths. Research it. At the end of the video, there's a list of links. Research, find out the truth, and then, with heart and mind, be a voice for change. Please. Thank you.